The air was still as Daniel stood in front of Buckingham Palace, the buzz of tourists blurring into the background. He wasn't a tourist. He wasn't here for pictures. And he certainly wasn't here by accident. Wearing a simple hoodie and faded jeans, Daniel didn't look like much. But under that casual exterior was a third-degree black belt, a man who had trained for nearly 2 decades in martial arts under the most intense dojos in Japan, Korea, and Brazil. He had walked away from competitions, refused sponsorships, and lived quietly. Until today. He took a slow step toward the iron fence. The iconic red-coated royal guard stood unmoving, eyes forward, faces carved from stone. No emotion, no fear. Daniel wasn't here to cause chaos. Not really. But he needed answers, desperately. And he had been told the answers lay behind those stone-faced men, buried deep within the palace. He hadn't wanted to believe it at first. That the secrets behind his brother's death were linked to the British royal family. That his brother, Michael, an MI6 operative turned whistleblower, had been silenced. But when the encrypted USB arrived at his doorstep 2 weeks ago, with his brother's name written on a piece of bloodstained cloth, he couldn't ignore it. The files were incomplete, jumbled. But one phrase stood out. They hide them under the floor of gold. He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But he was going to find out. Daniel took another step. The nearest guard, standing closest to the iron gate, barely moved. But Daniel saw it, a twitch, a flicker of attention. Daniel whispered, "I'm sorry." And then he moved. Fast. A blur. Years of training surged through his body like electricity. His leg shot up in a roundhouse kick, so swift it cut the air with a sharp whistle. The guard had no time to react. The heel of Daniel's boot connected squarely with the guard's cheek. The red hat flew off, and the man crumpled. Gasps erupted. Screams. Cameras whipped around. But Daniel was already leaping over the low fence, vaulting past the downed guard and sprinting toward the entrance before anyone could stop him. Alarms didn't blare. Guns weren't drawn. No sirens. That was the first clue something was wrong. He expected guards to come pouring out. Dogs. Barriers. But none came. Instead, the front doors slowly opened with a creak. Not slammed. Not kicked. Just opened. And waiting inside was a man in a black suit with a green pin on his lapel. "You're faster than the last one," he said calmly. "But you've made a terrible mistake." Daniel lunged forward, fists raised, but the man didn't move. Instead, the floor under Daniel gave way. A trapdoor. He fell, hard, into darkness. For a few seconds, he tumbled, bouncing off padded walls in what felt like a narrow slide. Then he crashed onto a metallic surface with a grunt. He rolled onto his side, disoriented, bruised, heart hammering. The silence was deafening. He stood slowly. The room was pitch black. "Michael," he called out. A soft whir came from above. A single bulb flickered on. He was standing in a small, circular room, the walls smooth like brushed steel. No windows. No doors. Then a voice crackled from somewhere. "You should have stayed home, Daniel." His spine stiffened. "Who are you?" "You already know. You're looking for your brother. But he wasn't what you thought he was." Daniel clenched his fists. "You killed him." The voice paused. "Did we?" Another light flickered on. This time behind a panel of glass. Behind it stood a man. Daniel's heart stopped. It was Michael. But something was off. He didn't move. His eyes stared straight ahead. Unblinking. "Michael." Daniel shouted. No response. The voice returned. "He's not dead." "Not really. He's been reprogrammed." "What the hell are you talking about?" More lights clicked on, revealing several other glass panels, each containing individuals, frozen like statues. Men, women, even a child. All of them stared blankly ahead. Daniel took a step back. "What is this?" The voice chuckled. "You wanted answers. Welcome to Project Oracle." Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out the chip he'd worn around his neck ever since receiving it, the only piece of evidence he had. The voice continued. "Your brother found out about our work. He tried to warn you. That was inconvenient." Daniel looked at Michael, His body looked the same, but his soul was missing. His brother was gone, but Daniel wasn't. With a roar, he lunged at the glass, pounding it with every ounce of force in his body. Nothing cracked. Temper, temper, the voice mocked. Then, suddenly, the floor shifted again. The room rotated. The walls slid away. Daniel was now standing on a long metallic bridge, surrounded by a bottomless pit. On the other side was a single door. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward it. But halfway across, something stepped into his path. Tall, muscular, head shaved, dressed in all black. Another martial artist. Daniel slowed. The man bowed. A challenge. Daniel didn't bow back. He struck first, a punch to the solar plexus, but the man dodged, countered with a sweeping kick. Daniel jumped, spun, landed, and returned with a hook to the jaw. But it barely made the man flinch. This wasn't just a trained fighter. This was someone like him. The fight was brutal. Minutes passed in a flurry of elbows, knees, dodges, and blocks. Every strike Daniel landed was returned with double the force. Blood trickled down from a cut above his eye. His ribs ached. His foot throbbed. But he didn't stop. Finally, with a perfectly timed spin kick, Daniel sent the man crashing to the side of the bridge, unconscious. Daniel limped toward the door. It opened before he touched it. Inside was a laboratory. Cold, bright, sterile. And in the middle of the room was a woman. Blonde, lab coat, calm eyes. "Hello, Daniel," she said softly. He didn't respond. She motioned to a chair. "You should sit. You're bleeding." "I'm not here for comfort," he growled. "What did you do to my brother?" She sighed. He volunteered. At first. Daniel's jaw clenched. No one volunteers to become that. He believed in our cause. The ability to enhance memory, reaction time, loyalty. He was supposed to be our prototype. But something went wrong. He remembered too much. She turned to a console and typed something in. Suddenly, Michael's image appeared on a monitor. Surveillance footage. He was strapped to a chair, eyes wide, screaming. Daniel watched, frozen in horror. The woman continued. He broke protocol. Tried to send messages to the outside. We assume. The moment he sent that USB, we had to shut him down. You murdered him. She looked at Daniel for a long moment. No. We paused him. Daniel stepped forward. Turn him back. I can't. Why not? Because if I do, he'll remember everything. And that would collapse everything we built. Daniel's mind was racing. None of his training, none of his battles, had prepared him for this. Not a fight. Not an enemy you could punch. This was deeper. More dangerous. He looked around the lab, eyes scanning for answers. There, a cabinet with files. He rushed toward it. The woman stepped back, but didn't try to stop him. Inside were rows of folders, all marked with red tabs. Names, countries, photos. This wasn't just about his brother. This was global. He grabbed as many folders as he could, stuffing them into his hoodie. But the lights began flashing red. Security breach detected. Lockdown in 60 seconds. Daniel turned toward the woman. Open the chamber. Let me take him. She hesitated. He's your brother, she whispered. But if you wake him, he'll never be the same. I don't care. She nodded slowly and entered a code into her console. Down the hallway, a glass door slid open. Daniel ran. He found Michael still standing, still staring blankly. He reached up, trembling, and pressed the emergency override switch. Michael blinked. His lips moved. Dan. And then the entire building trembled. Explosions. Sirens. The voice returned. You shouldn't have done that. Daniel grabbed Michael's arm. We're getting out. Michael's body was weak, stumbling, but alive. Together, they ran toward the emergency exit. More guards appeared. More black-suited fighters. But this time, Daniel didn't fight alone. Michael moved, slowly at first, then with more force. The training returned. The instincts. The brother he had known. Together, they fought. Elbow to elbow. Back to back. Daniel had never felt anything like it. They burst through the exit door into the night, breathing heavily. The palace behind them was dark, the chaos inside still echoing. They didn't stop running. Not that night. Not the next. Because the world they had stumbled into was just beginning to reveal its secrets. And someone, somewhere, had just put a target on both of their backs. They knew too much. And they were no longer alone. The night swallowed them whole as they disappeared into the shadows of London's sleeping streets. The palace behind them shrank with every step, its looming presence still echoing in their bloodstreams like a trauma their bodies couldn't forget. Daniel kept his grip tight around Michael's wrist, half dragging him through alleyways and across silent roads. Michael staggered like a ghost, pale and confused, his body responding by muscle memory, but his eyes still vacant, lost between who he once was and what they'd turned him into. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape was now burning out fast, and every breath Daniel took felt like it cost him a piece of his soul. He couldn't stop now. They had to vanish before the world found them again. They reached the edge of an underground station under renovation, its gates unlocked and unguarded. Daniel shoved the doors open and led Michael into the bowels of the earth, ducking behind rusted maintenance lockers and broken vending machines. For now, the silence was their ally. Daniel forced himself to slow his breathing, his hand trembling as he pressed it against Michael's chest. "You're alive," he whispered. Michael looked at him with a faint flicker of recognition. "Am I?" The words cut Daniel deeper than any blade. His brother's voice was hollow, uncertain, as if it belonged to someone else. And maybe it did. Whatever they had done to him, whatever process this Project Oracle had involved, it had rewired something fundamental. Michael was here, but fragments of him still lived in that cold room underground, behind glass panels and flickering monitors. Daniel wanted to scream, to rip the world open until someone gave him an answer that made sense. But rage wouldn't fix this. Survival would. Michael collapsed against the wall, knees giving out. Daniel knelt beside him, checking his pulse, trying to assess whether this was physical exhaustion or something more permanent. Michael stared at the ground as if seeing invisible patterns only he could understand. Then he spoke in a low whisper, barely audible over the hum of the city above. "They implanted a key in my memory." Daniel froze. What kind of key? Michael's eyes fluttered. Something digital. Biometric lock. Neural encryption. I don't remember all of it. They fractured me, split me into sectors. One for loyalty. One for memory. One for emotion. They were experimenting with partitioned consciousness. Daniel swallowed hard. This wasn't just about secret files anymore. They had used his brother as a living vault, a human code base for something far beyond what MI6, or even the royal family, should have been involved in. It was a kind of horror wrapped in the illusion of science. It made everything he believed in, every piece of his training, feel small and irrelevant. But he couldn't let himself fall into that pit of despair. Not now. "We need to get off grid," Daniel said, standing up. "If they catch us, they'll kill you. Or worse, put you back." Michael looked up, his eyes suddenly sharp. "They're already looking." That was all the warning Daniel got before he heard the mechanical hiss behind him. A vent cover slid open. Not from the wind. Not from rust. A drone. Sleek. Black. Silent. Its lenses swiveled and locked on them with insect-like precision. Daniel moved instinctively, yanking Michael to his feet and ducking just as a dart shot out and embedded itself in the locker behind them. Tranquilizer. Or something worse. He didn't wait to find out. They ran down the maintenance corridor, feet slamming against concrete, echoing like a signal flare into the silence. The drone followed, and behind it came more, 3, maybe 4, gliding like vultures with surgical intent. Daniel didn't have a plan. All he had was motion. They burst into an abandoned tunnel and sprinted until their lungs felt like they'd collapse. Daniel spotted a ladder leading up to a collapsed hatch and climbed with one arm while holding onto Michael with the other. They emerged in a forgotten warehouse on the edge of the Thames, hidden behind scaffolding and dust-covered crates. Inside it was quiet, too quiet. Daniel sealed the hatch behind them and slumped to the ground, chest heaving. Michael leaned against a crate, sweat pouring from his forehead. He was deteriorating. Whatever they put in his mind, it was breaking down, and fast. Daniel knew he couldn't help him alone. He needed someone who understood black science, who'd been involved in off-the-record experiments. That meant going to the one man he swore he'd never see again, Victor Dala, a ghost of a Cold War. A man who disappeared 2 decades ago after burning every intelligence bridge behind him. If anyone could decode what had been done to Michael, it was Victor. But finding him meant entering the Eastern underworld, a place where morality had long since been buried under blood and secrets. They left the warehouse before sunrise and boarded a stolen cargo truck, Daniel hot-wiring the ignition with the precision of a seasoned operative. Michael remained silent most of the trip, mumbling fragmented phrases, coordinates, phrases in Latin, codes that made no sense. But Daniel recorded every word. Nothing could be dismissed. Every syllable might be a trigger, a lock, a warning. Crossing into Europe was easier than expected. Daniel suspected that someone wanted them to run, that the real hunt wouldn't begin until they were exactly where the enemy wanted them to be. Still, he pushed forward, using black market contacts and old favors to get across France and into the outskirts of Romania. That's where the trail ended, and where Victor Dala began. They found him in a derelict monastery near the Carpathians, surrounded by fog and silence. At first, Daniel thought they'd been misled, but when he stepped inside the stone chapel, he saw the unmistakable figure standing before a table cluttered with wires, monitors, and human organs suspended in glass. Victor hadn't aged. Not really. His hair was silver now, his beard thicker, but the eyes were exactly as Daniel remembered, cold, calculating, and never surprised. "You brought me a time bomb," Victor said, without turning. "How delightful." Daniel stepped forward. "He's my brother." Victor finally looked at him. "Then you should be twice as afraid." They strapped Michael to a reinforced table, not out of cruelty, but necessity. His body spasmed intermittently, and sometimes his eyes turned completely black, as if something else was trying to surface. Victor began his scans, using a mix of modern tech and something older, something Daniel didn't recognize. Symbols. Electrodes that pulsed in unnatural rhythms. It was half science, half ritual. What did they do to him? Daniel asked, unable to watch the screen anymore. "They made him a key," Victor said. "But not just to a file or a vault. To a system. One that controls thought, behavior, loyalty." Daniel blinked. "Like mind control?" Victor smiled grimly. "Like evolution. Forced. Engineered. This project, they weren't building weapons. They were building kings. Leaders. Puppets that believe they are free." Daniel felt his stomach twist. Michael convulsed. Then he screamed. But it wasn't his voice. It was layered, like 10 people speaking at once. Protocol breach detected. Execute fail-safe. Victor's eyes widened. "Get down." An explosion erupted inside the lab table, controlled but powerful. Michael's body jerked, and a blast of light surged from his temple to the ceiling, striking an antenna Daniel hadn't even noticed. And then, stillness. Michael lay limp. Daniel rushed forward, gripping his brother's shoulders. "Michael, stay with me." Victor moved to the monitors, reading lines of code that now appeared as if written by a ghost. They activated the transmission. "He's sending something." "Sending what?" Victor leaned closer, and his face paled. "Coordinates. A location. But not to us. To them." Daniel's heart dropped. They hadn't just failed to go off-grid. They had become the epicenter of whatever was coming next. Victor turned to him, eyes dead serious. "You need to leave. Now. Take him. Hide him. They'll be here in hours." Daniel lifted Michael, who was barely conscious now, mumbling in what sounded like ancient Greek. As he turned toward the door, Victor grabbed his arm. "One last thing," he said. "The phrase he keeps repeating. Under the floor of gold. I thought it was symbolic. But it's not. What is it then? A place. Buried under the old parliament. A chamber built centuries ago. No one talks about it because no one is supposed to know it exists. They called it the root. If you want to end this, truly end it, that's where you go. Daniel nodded slowly, eyes burning. Then that's where we'll go. And without another word, he carried his brother back into the dark, knowing that the next chapter wouldn't be a fight. It would be a war. The journey back to London was a descent into madness. Every highway felt like a corridor lined with invisible watchers. The silence in Michael's breathing terrified Daniel more than any noise could have. His brother would come to, then slip away again, muttering words in dead languages, numbers in no discernible pattern, sometimes whispering names Daniel didn't recognize. The entire time, Daniel's grip never left the wheel. Not even when exhaustion made his eyes burn. Not even when he saw shadows moving where there shouldn't be any. Sleep was not an option now. They weren't just returning to the city. They were returning to the root of a centuries-old conspiracy, a place that predated memory and had outlived kings. And somewhere beneath the polished floors of Parliament, something waited, watching, listening. Daniel ditched the stolen car a mile away from Westminster and took Michael underground, through sewers and maintenance tunnels he had memorized during old assignments. The smell of decay clung to every brick. Water dripped like whispers. Rats scattered in every direction as they moved deeper. Michael now semi-lucid, walking but murmuring to himself. It wasn't until they reached the accessed grate beneath the old House of Commons that Daniel felt the temperature shift, noticeably colder, heavier. He pried the rusted bolts loose and hoisted his brother through. Beyond the grate was a tunnel unlike the rest. The walls were not brick, but smooth black stone, too refined, too ancient to belong to Victorian architecture. And there were carvings, symbols, circles intersecting with spines, eyes inside of triangles, and one recurring shape, what looked like a tree with its roots above and its branches below. As they pressed forward, Michael stopped and touched one of the walls. "This is it," he whispered. "The root." Daniel nodded, though every instinct in his body screamed to turn back. But the door at the end of the tunnel opened by itself. No lock, no resistance. It had been waiting. The chamber beyond was unlike anything Daniel had imagined. It wasn't a room. It was a cathedral buried in the earth. High above, the ceiling shimmered like starlight reflected through water. In the center, a dais of gold floated inches above the ground, surrounded by black pillars that hummed with unseen energy. On the dais was a throne, no, a machine in the shape of a throne, and seated in it was a man, or what had once been a man. He was perfectly still, skin stretched like wax, eyes wide open and glowing faintly. Tubes ran from his arms into the floor. He wasn't dead. He wasn't alive. He was in stasis, feeding something or being fed by it. Around him were 10 empty thrones, each one pulsing with an identical low vibration. Daniel instinctively placed Michael's hand on his chest, shielding him from whatever this was. But Michael moved past him, calm, drawn. "I remember now," he said. "I've been here before." Daniel stared at him. "When? How?" Michael touched the dais. "They brought me when I was 12. I didn't understand it then. They called it the network. Said it was older than the crown, older than the country. A neural matrix woven from the minds of chosen ones. They feed it. In exchange, it gives guidance, predictions, control. The royals use it. The agencies. Maybe even the banks. It runs everything." Daniel looked at the floating throne. "And he's the prime node. First one they connected. Hundreds of years ago. They keep him alive with nanotech and ritual. Each throne was meant to be filled by a successor. Oracle protocol. 10 minds linked. Bound by silence, forever awake." Daniel's stomach turned. "You were supposed to be next." Michael nodded. "They fractured me to prepare. Broke me into parts to make the upload cleaner. But I failed the final sync. Something inside me resisted. That's when they wiped me. Put me in the black chamber. You remember the rest." Daniel couldn't move. The horror of it all didn't come from the technology or even the scale of the conspiracy. It came from the calmness in his brother's voice. Not rage, not fear, just acceptance. like the knowledge itself had dulled all emotion. But then something shifted. A sound, not a physical noise, but something in the mind. A frequency that bypassed the ears and whispered directly into the skull. "Return the node," it said. Michael clutched his head, stumbling back. "It's talking again." Daniel grabbed him. "What does it want?" "To complete the chain," Michael gasped. "If I sit in the throne, it will be finished. The 10 will be whole. The network will wake." Daniel shook his head. "We destroy it. Now." But even as he spoke, the air thickened. The pillars began to glow. A deep hum vibrated in his bones. The chamber was waking up. "You can't destroy it," Michael said. "You'd have to sever the link from the inside." "Then that's what we do," Daniel said, pulling the last of the explosives from his pack, relics from a life he'd left behind. "We overload the neural interface. We collapse the root." Michael didn't move. He stared at the throne. "If you do that, all the minds inside are already gone," Daniel interrupted. "You said it yourself. They're not people anymore." "But I am," Michael said quietly. "And the only way to end it is if I go in." Daniel's hands froze over the detonator. "No." Michael smiled, soft and sad. "I'll go in, and while I'm in the network, you detonate. I can delay the sync, maybe even sever the others. But you have to destroy this place before it finds another way." Daniel stepped forward. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Michael said. "This thing lives on patterns, connection. I'm the broken piece. I can be the virus in its blood. But you have to end it." Daniel wanted to argue, to scream. But deep down he knew. This was the choice. The only one that meant anything. Michael stepped into the throne and sat down. The moment his back touched the interface, the wires snaked up his arms. His eyes fluttered. His mouth fell open, and the room exploded in light. Daniel pressed the detonator. Then everything went white. He woke up 2 days later in a hospital somewhere outside Birmingham, with a false name on his chart and a black market contact watching over him. His ribs were cracked, and his hearing hadn't fully returned. But he was alive. The chamber had collapsed. Emergency workers called it a gas explosion beneath Parliament. No deaths. No investigation. The city moved on. The world spun forward. But something in the silence felt different. Daniel limped outside that morning and looked at the skyline. Big Ben stood tall. The Thames rolled by. But somewhere deep in the base of his skull, he could still feel the faintest echo of that hum. And he wondered, had he really destroyed it? Or had he just paused it? The next time he closed his eyes, he saw Michael's face, not broken, not damaged, but calm. Content. And maybe, just maybe, smiling. But in that smile, Daniel wasn't sure if he saw peace or something else entirely.